Gang, I want to tell you something that you probably already know. Things over time tend to degrade. You probably don't have as much energy now as you did as a kid. And that's because of something that we like to call free path loss. Call it the entropy effect if you want. It refers to the fact that as we have a certain amount of power pushed into an energy wave, it's going to disperse, it's going to lose its energy over time. Not because there's some vampire tap sucking it out, it simply fades. And the proportion of that fading is, all things being equal, going to be based upon what we call an inverse squared law. It's like the light of the sun, or if you throw a rock into a pond. Initially, that wave when you throw a rock into a pool of water, it's really big, sploosh, right? Big wave right there. But it doesn't say sploosh with a big wave all the way out to the coastline, does it? What happens? Well, it starts off big, but then as that wave moves farther away from the source, it tends to thin out, tends to fade. And it does so, again, according to an inverse squared law. So inverse squared refers to the fact that if you have something that initially, uh, if we have, if we move something, let's say, a certain distance away, it'll lose a certain amount of power. But as we move it twice as far away, it'll lose 4 times as much power. So maybe it loses half the distance in the first one, then it loses down to a quarter of the power at twice the distance. Double the distance again, we don't end up doubling it though, it's inverse squared, so therefore it is 1/16th the power. We go double the distance again, now we're a 32nd of the power. Again, I want you to think of this, and as we look at this idea of a wave moving out from this center point, you see here on the diagram how we're essentially still have our concentrated energy, but you see it with each wave, that energy is now having to spread across a greater and greater distance. And therefore, by the time we get out to this peripheral edge, the amount of energy is no longer concentrated, it's been dispersed, and therefore does not have as much effectiveness. This is why if I talk in my normal voice to you, you can hear me if you're up close, but you can't hear me if you're far away. I mean, why does that happen? Because the energy gets eaten up, essentially, by the distance. The light from faraway stars is not as bright as if you were right there in front of the star. Why is that? Well, it's not because the star is any less bright per se itself, but again, we're just receiving out of that overall wave, we're only receiving one tiny little fraction of the energy that's coming from that remote star. The rest of it is, again, in a spherical way, dispersed all the way around it. So it's something to be aware of with wireless. It's why distance matters when we're talking about setting up wireless antennas, and why we have to be very considerate about when people are roaming from one access point to another. The placement of antennas has to be at a minimum based upon our understanding of radio frequencies, how their wavelength or frequency is going to disperse a certain distance before it suffers free path loss. And although we can inject more energy into it, increasing the amplitude, we can only do so within regulations so that we don't fry our brains with Wi-Fi. So it's kind of how all these things are going to fit together to create essentially just signal from an antenna pushing out an electromagnetic wave getting received by receiving antenna on the other side.